For over 2 centuries, trains have had a gargantuan impact on our lives. From the bustling cities to the provincial area, trains have completely shaped the way we perceive travel out of all means of transportations. A sheer transformation into the innovation of engineering caused the trains to bring a massive influence into the everyday life of the passengers. Like the Underground Railway, a brainchild of the major British railway system, is now a route for 700 million passengers each year. Inventions such as the rocket locomotive powered Britain's industrial revolution and contributed to the building of an empire. The rocket is the locomotive that changed the world significantly. It was invented at a time when people were already living their lives to the fullest with fun and luxury, something we still enjoy today. Trains allowed us to break away from our usual routines and feel the thrill of speed like never before. Even famous trains like the Flying Scotsman changed the way we would eat every day's meal, because the raw foods are not confined to a weeks ahead schedule. Any food item can easily be transported these days with the help of the fastest locomotions. They've made it possible to bring fresh fish from Cornwall that can be easily dispatched in a day to London. As the day went by, Britain became obsessed with speed racing. They've always wanted to move things faster. Trains were the first to show us what real speed was. Back in the steam age, everyone was competing to get more passengers on board. The steam-powered trains that zoomed past you paved the way for super-fast trains like the bullet train and the TGV. It's an amazing engineering accomplishment. With all these advancements, one question remains unanswered. How much faster will trains become in the future? In the 1920s, Britain was still recovering from the aftermath of the Great War. While the country focused on rebuilding, another battle was brewing. This time, the war was on its railways. By the beginning of 1923, 4 major railway companies controlled most of Britain's railway network. Competition for passengers was intense, especially on popular routes like the prestigious London to Edinburgh route, which was shared between the London and North Eastern Railway and the London Midland and Scottish Railway. Bob Gwynne, the director of National Rail Musum, said,
"Because of the grouping of the railways, if you wanted to go up to Edinburgh, you had a choice. You could either go to London King's Cross and get on the London North Eastern Railway, or you could go and get on the London Midland Scottish route."
Each railway company was pulling all the stops to strip off the passengers from their rivals, and the London and North Eastern Railway was on the brink of a major breakthrough. The competition between the East and West Coast routes had always been fierce over which could offer the fastest journey to Scotland. In this battle, the biggest secret bullseye was the speed, and the Elner's answer was the Flying Scotsman, arguably the most famous locomotive in history. Operating non-stop along the 390-mile route, it slashed the travel time between London and Edinburgh to just over 8 hours. When the non-stop service was launched in 1928, it was a significant achievement, marking the longest uninterrupted journey in the world. While the Flying Scotsman name had long been associated with the London to Edinburgh service, a brand new locomotive bearing that name was introduced in 1923. It was the brainchild of Nigel Gresley, one of the foremost engineers of the early 20th century. Railway historian Mr. Tim Dunn said,
"The Flying Scotsman was a development of lots of things that went before it. When it came out, it was regarded as colossal. It was the biggest express engine on the network at that time. It had huge driving wheels, and also it had improved valve gear, which are the things that enable the steam to get into the cylinders and go along the pistons and so on."
Nearly 90 years since its initial construction during the steam era, this renowned locomotive still hails to operate. Andrew Martin, an author with a passion for train history, has written numerous books on the subject, citing Flying Scotsman as his favorite.
"I mean, you'd know it was going fast because in the dining car, your knife might be tinkling against the glass, your gin and tonic be wobbling a bit. Well, it was supposed to be glamorous. There was a barber for men who shaved you with a cutthroat razor going at 90 miles per hour. There was a salon de coiffure for women. Of course, there was a bar, and there was a restaurant. The first class especially was very well appointed.
For the London and North Eastern Railway, which operated the Flying Scotsman, luxury was not its only intention. It was strategically designed to outpace its competitors in the race for publicity. To achieve this, the train's designer, Nigel Gresley, was tasked with attempting to reach the milestone speed of 100 miles per hour. This record-breaking event was scheduled for November 30th, 1934, between Leeds and King's Cross.
Well, the 100 miles per hour run was a publicity stunt like all these record attempts, but this was all about an excuse for a headline. A speed record gives you a pretext for a headline, and it was all about getting the train into the newspapers.
William Sparshott was the hard-driving driver who was given the challenging task to maximize the speed of this steam engine-powered train. To calculate how fast the train could go, they had a special measurement carriage attached called a dynamometer, which is still preserved today by the National Railway Museum in York. The dynamometer was first initiated by the North Eastern Railway in 1906. It's a mobile laboratory specifically designed to measure the power of steam locomotives. There remains a seat at the center where there would be one gentleman taking the helm of the train. There would be one on each side of him holding those buttons there. These settings were imperative to know the speed, because the apparatus reading would be of nothing unless they know where they are. So, speed was a crucial factor of the whole picture, and every quarter of a mile when they saw the mileposts, those fellows would push that button, and it would record on the meter. At the time when they contemplated for a record speed, the train whizzed its way from King's Cross, but it wasn't close to reaching 100 miles per hour. It seemed like Flying Scotsman would barely make a headline in the news for which it was intended for. However, on the journey back from Leeds, driver Bill Sparshott knew he had one more opportunity, and he didn't want to backslide from there. About 90 miles from London, on a downhill stretch of track, he fed the train everything it needed to function as speedy as it could to finally reach the speed it was aiming for, and he succeeded. Professor Kate Williams said,
"It was absolutely amazing. From the fact that in 130 years the train has gone from rattling along at 5 miles per hour to shooting at 100 miles per hour. Britain really feels it's leading the world in trains."
Flying Scotsman had the groundswell of support from the train was even featured in a movie with the same name, which included the raving scenes of the heroine hanging on for dear life outside the carriages as it raced through the countryside. By breaking the 100 miles per hour barrier, Flying Scotsman started a new era of high-speed railways. But how did the steam age get its start? Before the railways were laid across the country, Britain's land was not ready for speedy transport. The lands were designated for the people enjoying leisurely walks and games of cricket on the village green. Travelling faster than a galloping horse was unheard of. Stagecoaches were the main mode of transport, but they weren't very speedy. People can travel around 10 to 15 miles per hour at best. But the Industrial Revolution changed everything. Factories started churning out goods in large quantities, and business leaders wanted their products delivered faster than ever before. Merthyr Tydfil in South Wales was at the heart of this revolution, housing some of the world's largest ironworks. It's also where rail travel began. In 1804, engineer Richard Trevithick created a machine to transport 10 tons of iron from these ironworks. This machine, equipped with a high-pressure steam engine on wheels, became the world's first locomotive, even though it wasn't particularly fast. In the early days, locomotives turned out pretty much rudimentary and could only reach speeds of perhaps 4 or 5 miles per hour. It was beyond anyone's thoughts that within 20 or 30 years, these early trains would be able to transport passengers across Britain at speeds of 40 or 50 miles per hour. Railways began to sprout up all over the country. In October 1829, trials were conducted to ascertain the fastest locomotive for a new line that would connect between Liverpool and Manchester. This trial of competence carried out a firm testing in all the 5 competing engines to their limits to check their speed ability. The Rainhill trials became a major breakthrough, as this event witnessed almost thousands of people gathered to drool over these engines competing against each other. One of the contenders was Robert Stephenson, who was eager to demonstrate the potential of steam power. He entered his concept of the ideal locomotive for hauling trains into the competition. Stephenson's locomotive, known as the Rocket, was capable of speeds of up to 30 miles per hour, 3 times faster than a horse and cart. On the day of the trials, approximately 15,000 spectators watched as the Rocket outperformed the other 4 competitors. Stephenson's Rocket was a revelation. People who had previously only experienced the speed of a galloping horse were amazed to see this small yellow locomotive zipping around the track, which was truly astonishing. The Rocket gained widespread fame, even appearing in a 1923 Buster Keaton film. Although it may seem slow by today's standards, Stephenson's Rocket marked the beginning of a period known as railway mania.
Through the railway mania of the 1840s, people began to realize that trains mean speed. You can whiz across the country, and most importantly, you can get goods from A to B incredibly quickly. Your mail could go by train so quickly, and the Liverpool and Manchester Railway was the first railway to carry mail. You have this really zippy exchange of news, and that's really important for business, because business can now communicate between different factories.
The competition between railway companies during the railway mania continued to focus on speed. This had a ripple effect on the availability of food and beverages for people. The reasons people were concerned about the speed was due to a limitation imposed in the Victorian diet. They were limited in terms of perishable goods such as dairy, meat, milk, and eggs. Thanks to the railways, strawberries and other fruits could be transported from distant farms to major cities. Even fish, caught off the coast of Cornwall, took a day to reach London. As railways expanded into rural areas during the Victorian era, they impacted the lives of an increasing number of people. It's important to understand that witnessing things move at such incredible speeds was entirely unprecedented for people at that time. When these locomotives zoomed past farms, emitting smoke, sparks, and steam, it was undoubtedly terrifying for many. There were concerns that the animals would be startled out of shock, and some even worried that the smoke would turn all the sheep black. But these apprehensions weren't confined to the rural landscapes and streets of Victorian Britain. Even Queen Victoria herself harbored similar sentiments. She was wary of the railways and the idea of traveling at high speeds. Victoria insisted that 30 miles per hour was the maximum speed she would tolerate because she believed anything faster would harm her health. Consequently, when the royal train passed through, it caused delays as other trains had to wait behind it. Victorians weren't just worried about getting physically hurt from traveling too fast. They also feared it could mess with their minds. They thought that speeding along could make people act like wild animals. There were even scary stories, like one on the front page of the police news, where a guy went crazy and attacked his friend on a train. The idea was that traveling fast could make someone so worked up that they'd hurt the people they were with. Even with these exaggerated stories, folks continued to rely on railways. As trains sped up, traveling between big cities in Britain became easier for everyone. The Flying Scotsman, chugging between London and Edinburgh, stood out as a symbol of the fantastic era of steam travel. In Kettering, where the freshly refurbished Flying Scotsman had just finished its 2.5-hour trip from London, crowds gathered to marvel at this incredible piece of railway history.
The train was like a major celebrity. It was surrounded by hundreds of people. It's really touching to think that all the local radio stations along the route announce when the train is coming. It's like a message traveling across the entire country. When you're going at 75 miles per hour, it feels like the train is floating. The faster you go, the smoother the ride gets. But going faster also means there's more dust because of the coal in the tender, as you can probably see.
Flying Scotsman's achievement of surpassing the 100 miles per hour barrier solidified its position in history. However, its creator, Nigel Gresley, wasn't content with this milestone. Before long, Flying Scotsman was outshone by another locomotive, Mallard, which would later claim the title of the fastest steam-powered train in history. Mallard's smooth design was created during a time when streamlined forms were greatly valued. Intriguingly, its shape drew inspiration from the sleek lines of Bugatti cars. This design direction mirrored Mallard's role as a high-speed train. During testing, the directors of the London North Eastern Railway, along with engineers like Gresley, were keen to discover Mallard's maximum speed. In 1938, just 4 years after Flying Scotsman reached world's record speed, Mallard shattered the record by reaching a mind-blowing speed of 126 miles per hour. This record remains unbroken to this day, which made Mallard the fastest steam engine of all time. However, it also indicated the end of an era for this particular technology. As the steam locomotive became around over 100 years old, they started showing signs of wear and tear. Those machines were quite complex. They come with lots of moving parts that need constant fixing. Plus, they had to lug around heavy coal for fuel, which made them less efficient. At the same time, there was a push for a new kind of train. The era of diesel-powered trains was about to hit the track. Some people saw the potential of the diesel engine for trains. Unlike steam engines, diesel trains were easy to start and easy to operate. Just turn a key and you're good to go. Over in America in the 1930s, railway companies were leading the way in adopting this new technology. They started developing diesel-powered trains that looked sleek and modern. These trains could zip along much faster than the old steam ones. It was like a new chapter beginning in train travel. In 1934, the diesel-powered Zephyr train was introduced. Made from stainless steel, it was incredibly light, so light that 10 men could easily move it along the tracks. On May 26th, it set a new record by traveling from Denver to Chicago, a distance of 1,000 miles, in just over 13 hours. This famous American streamliner train reached speeds of up to 120 miles per hour on its record-breaking run across the country. The Zephyr was the first of the diesel-powered streamliners, considered by some the most beautiful and glamorous trains ever built. Tim Dunn also said,
"These diesel rail cars in the 1930s were definitely the way forward, and their streamlining was there to show that diesel was the future and steam was the past."
Diesel had made trains faster, more efficient, and more reliable. Higher-speed passenger services started to appear all over the world. But by the 1950s, a new rival to the train had matched the rail.
After the Second World War, most countries across the world expanded their road networks. Cars became much cheaper. The car was so speedy and so independent you can go anywhere.
But cars weren't the only threat. And aloft, cruising in comfort at 10 or 2,000 feet, the aircraft had arrived.
Planes were now flying quickly, frequently, and safely, and there was a general feeling that really the age of the train was now past. When you listen to a lot of politicians talking in the 1950s and 60s, the train was some old-fashioned Victorian thing that we had to get rid of. That was the argument being pushed, and a lot of people believed it. So the railways were really under real threat, and what they needed to do was to push back hard.
By the 1950s, it seemed like trains were losing their status as the preferred mode of transportation. The railway industry responded in one clear direction. They aimed for significant progress by getting faster and faster. In just a century, trains had revolutionized our speed of travel, evolving from the pace of a galloping horse to the 100 miles per hour Flying Scotsman. However, by the late 1950s, airplanes and cars had taken the lead over trains. Government policies heavily favored roads over railways. Trains were no longer the preferred choice for quick travel. Then, seemingly unexpectedly, a revolution emerged. In 1964, during the Olympics, Japan stunned the world by introducing the first ever electric high-speed line and the instantly iconic Shinkansen bullet train.
Shinkansen bullet trains were a huge leap forward. They were a quantum leap. Post-war Japan was in a terrible state. The railways were seen as a mechanism by which they could emerge from post-war state of dereliction.
The Shinkansen heralded Japan's stratospheric rise as an economic superpower, and everything about the train's design announced its modernity. They looked more and more like alien sharks or strange creatures from lost underwater planets. When the train comes into a station, you think, wow, I've never seen anything like it. Inside the first bullet trains, the design was also revolutionary.
So we're sat in the Shinkansen Series 0. It's like being sat in a 1960s airliner, and that's quite deliberate. It's designed to be like an airplane, designed to empty the airlines, designed to make you comfortable at high speed.
In stark contrast to the rest of the world, the Japanese invested heavily in trains.
The 1960s. If you're in Britain, rock and roll, cars, and planes. People wanted their Ford Zephyr or whatever to roar up the M1, which was brand new. Nobody on it. Well, the Japanese didn't go down that road. They said, no, we're going to go with a fast train from point to point.
Not only were they fast, they were famously comfortable.
And if you were sat down in one of these seats and the train was roaring along at 130 miles per hour, you wouldn't feel it. You would think, I'm in the modern world. The Shinkansen trains are probably the smoothest trains I have ever traveled on. The train just eases away from the platform. Traveling on a Shinkansen train at speed is as if you were riding along a silk kimono. If I was a Japanese bullet train driver, I'd be right at the top of my profession, and I'd be very important. Almost sort of star status. He'd put on his white gloves, and then he would be able to drive the train.
The bullet train ran on dedicated high-speed tracks that enabled it to zip along at 130 miles per hour and slash the journey from Tokyo to Osaka from 7 hours to just 4.
Well, what makes the Shinkansen so fast? Of course, it's got a dedicated track which is fairly straight, but instead of there being one engine and a pile of coaches with only the engine having the power and the coaches being dragged along, every single wheel on this train is powered. In iconic terms, this train ran past Mount Fuji. It meant you had a picture of modernity. It meant Japan had stepped away from the horrors of the Second World War, was proving that it was forward. It was forward in a new way.
The Shinkansen bullet train wasn't just a breakthrough in engineering, it also sparked a revolution in Japan's economy and culture. Moreover, it served as the inspiration for a new era of high-speed travel worldwide. After the unveiling of the bullet train, we really start to see a train race, a train arms race you might say, throughout the world. Over in Britain, there had been little investment for decades. Britain's railway was in slow decline. Really, 1960s and 1970s. British Rail was more famous for its delayed trains and soggy sandwiches than for its technical innovation. But there was one vehicle, one train, that actually changed the face of British Rail. A decade after the introduction of the bullet train, Britain re-emerged in the speed arena with the Intercity 125. Dubbed after its top operational speed of 125 miles per hour, it remains the fastest diesel-powered train to date, characterized by groundbreaking design features. Its sleek, streamlined nose resembled that of a racing car, while its construction from robust molded plastic ensured durability. Moreover, its power was enhanced by diesel-electric power cars positioned at each end of the train.
It was the bringing together of so much tech into one place that made this a revolutionary train. And frankly, it conquered the whole of British Rail. And it saved British Rail. It really was, and it was known as the Journey Shrinker.
Despite its success, the Intercity 125 faced stiff competition from coaches and cars. A clever marketing campaign aimed to convince car enthusiasts to embrace the advantages offered by the new train.
It's a lovely comparison of road and rail. It was so successful, actually. Other countries licensed the concept out for their own railways. So Germany did a similar ad, almost exactly the same, with some of their electric trains later on that year.
Even though it could carry passengers between cities quicker than ever before, one thing held the Intercity 125 back from achieving its full potential. It was running on the same tracks that would have carried Flying Scotsman 50 years earlier. In the late 70s, Britain's high-speed train, the 125, raced along on what can be described as Victorian-era technology, navigating ancient winding railway routes all over the place. But in France, we go one step further. They make this better. They build dedicated brand new high-speed tracks, which means the trains go much, much faster without the impediment of going around corners or slow trains getting in their way. And so the top engineers in the country come together to build TGV, the train à grande vitesse. The Intercity 125's time as the most advanced train in Europe was done. This was a new dawn for high-speed rail on the continent, and the TGV was at the forefront. In a dazzling test run in 1981, France's first high-speed train clocked up a breathtaking speed of 236 miles per hour.
The train is zipping along so fast, you just feel. They see the dust coming up past the train, and the people on board are cheering in. It's a truly magnificent moment. It smashed the previous record by an incredible 30 miles per hour. And in 1981, France seizes the high-speed crown. And you would too, after all the investments from the government, get into this massive high-speed train project.
Later that year, the Paris to Lyon line opened to everyone. It wasn't as fast as in testing, but still hit 161 miles per hour, making it the world's fastest train. The TGV's arrival kicked off France's big high-speed rail push, a source of national pride and Europe's envy. Meanwhile, Britain's trains chugged along on old tracks. But what happened next changed everything. The world's longest international rail tunnel. On the other side of the thin chalk wall, his British counterpart Graham Fagg was also drilling. It was the 1st of December 1990, somewhere beneath the English Channel, when two construction workers pierced through the last section of rock and connected the two halves of the Channel Tunnel. This marked the long-awaited handshake, a momentous occasion that reunited Britain and mainland Europe for the first time since the last ice age. The two tunnelers exchanged national flags amidst flowing champagne in what was probably the largest underground party ever. The atmosphere was incredibly warm and friendly. Arriving at 9:53 to France, this was the Queen's first glimpse of Waterloo's glittering international rail terminal. From here, the Eurostar Express would begin its 3-hour journey to Paris. But when the tunnel finally opened for business in 1994, the trains only ran at high speed on the French side. During the opening ceremony, the Queen travelled from Waterloo to Calais at a leisurely 80 miles per hour, while President Mitterrand's party in France raced to Calais at a swift 186 miles per hour, more than double the speed. Following the formal opening ceremony at Calais came another historic first. The problem was simple. Trains ran high speed from Paris across the country into the tunnel at great speed, and then emerged and then slowed to a crawl as they came out off dedicated railway lines onto Britain's Victorian railway network. In fact, it wasn't until the 21st century that Britain caught up with its old rival. Finally, in 2007, Britain opened its first ever dedicated high-speed line, running from London to the Channel Tunnel at a top speed of 186 miles per hour. It cut the journey time to Paris from almost 3 hours to just 2 hours and 15 minutes. All across Europe, high-speed networks are expanding rapidly, while Britain's HS2 stalls amid massive controversy. The rest of Europe has surged ahead.
High speed has developed so much across Europe for a key reason. There are so many countries where big cities are quite close together, which it doesn't really make sense to fly across. Under 2.5 hours, rail becomes a real competitor. Now, why wouldn't you want to travel from city center to city center and avoid all those horrible queues and all that awful stuff, and get a great view and get up and walk around a bit? I mean, that is how you want to fly around Europe. You fly around Europe by train.
High-speed rail networks have become a global phenomenon, spanning across more than 20 countries from South Korea to Saudi Arabia. Japan, the pioneer of high-speed travel, is celebrated for its famously punctual bullet trains. While the scenic views remain unchanged, these trains have significantly increased in speed since their debut in 1964, with the fastest Shinkansen now reaching an astonishing 199 miles per hour. However, China has recently claimed the title of the world's fastest passenger train. The Chinese have developed an amazing network of high-speed trains, really linking all their major cities with high-speed lines because they realize that it's a much more efficient form of transport than aviation. Japan versus China in terms of railway speed, of course, it's a cultural rivalry, an economic rivalry, a political rivalry. They watch each other across the sea, and they want to beat each other. They are just smashing through new high-speed lines. Furthermore, they haven't got to deal with the same tech. They're going straight to electric power and proving themselves on the world stage. And it's not just the longest network in the world, it's also the fastest, reaching speeds up to a breathtaking 217 miles per hour between Beijing and Shanghai.
Trains will carry on getting faster as long as the technology and physical manifestations of that enable it in a safe way to do it. We are talking about things that run on 2 strips of steel on little wheels.
And the Chinese have built something that doesn't rely on wheels, the maglev. It glides across the track using magnetic levitation. This lack of friction means they can go faster than any other train in the world. Less than 100 years after the Flying Scotsman, you have the maglev train. That is incredible, a true absolute engineering miracle. This train does actually feel very different from a Japanese bullet train. It's a hell of a lot faster, but the minute it starts to move, the train starts to tip forward. You find yourself leaning back, and within seconds, you're literally being thrown round corners, and you can feel the skin on your face being pulled back. Trains and speed are inextricably interlinked, and the train is getting faster and faster every decade. I wonder whether those Victorians who were so delighted by going at 60 miles per hour could imagine there'd be Japanese and Chinese trains now going at over 500 kilometers an hour. What is amazing today is that this 19th century invention is now a very clean form of transport. With electric trains, it's seen as environmentally much more sustainable. It'll be lovely to watch a Victorian technology come into the 21st century and continue to deliver on the promises it made all that time ago. In a way, it's the car nowadays that is seen as an old-fashioned invention. Railways are seen as modern, and maybe one day they might even outlive the car. Almost a century after Flying Scotsman flew into the history books, breaking the 100 miles per hour barrier, trains now go at once unimaginable speeds. Trains have been faced with setbacks and challenges, but have overcome them every time. They are now carrying billions of people around the globe faster than ever before. The solution to our transport problems has been with us all along. When it comes to speed, the train is our past, present, and future. This probably is the new age of the train.